Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if your brain pays attention to things you don't even see? This new study dives deep into that puzzling question. Imagine seeing something so quickly or so vaguely that you are sure you didn't really see it. But what if your brain still noticed it and used that information? That is the core idea researchers have been exploring. And this paper takes a fresh look at it. They're asking a really big question: is seeing something actually needed for your brain to pay attention to it? For a long time, people thought attention and consciousness. Well, seeing things were pretty much the same thing. If you paid attention to something, you must have seen it. But over the years, scientists have found more and more evidence that maybe, just maybe, attention can happen even when we're not fully aware of what we're paying attention to. Think about it like this. Sometimes you might steer your car to avoid an obstacle you barely registered seeing. That is kind of what they're getting at. This idea of subconscious attention is a big deal because it challenges how we think our brains work and control our behavior. A key study that really got people talking about this was by Jiang and her colleagues in 2006. They used a technique called continuous flash suppression, or CFS, to make images, like nude photos, essentially invisible to people's conscious awareness, even though participants couldn't say they saw the images. Their attention seemed to be drawn to them, especially if they matched the viewer's sexual orientation. This was pretty shocking and suggested that our attention could be guided by things we're not even aware of. The researchers in this paper even did their own version of that Jiang study, and they found similar results. They indeed found that when nude images were suppressed using CFS, heterosexual participants' spatial attention was unconsciously drawn to them. But here is where things get interesting. They worried that maybe CFS, which uses rapid flickering patterns, might be doing something special. It messes with how our eyes see things, and maybe that interaction is what causes the attention effect, rather than just general unconscious processing. They wanted to see if they could get the same effect using a different method for making things invisible. So they turned to a different technique called Gaze-Contingent crowding, or GCC. Think of crowding like this: when you look at something in your side vision, and there are other things right next to it, it can get blurry or hard to identify, even if you know something's there. GCC uses this. They present images in the edge of your vision, surrounded by other distracting shapes. And crucially, if your eyes even start to wander away from the center, the image disappears and is replaced by a neutral shape. This way, the images stay in your peripheral vision and are hard to consciously identify. So, what did they do in this experiment? They had 66 people look at a screen. In the middle, there was a cross to stare at. To the sides, they showed either nude pictures or neutral shapes that looked a bit like the nude pictures. These were surrounded by other distracting shapes to make them hard to see clearly. That is the crowding part. While participants were staring at the center, a tiny, slightly tilted Gabor patch would flash briefly on one of the sides. People had to say if it tilted left or right. The tricky part is that to make sure the side images stayed hard to see, as soon as participants' eyes moved even a little bit away from the center, those images would be replaced. After each trial, participants were asked on a special scale called the Perceptual Awareness Scale if they saw anything at all, how confident they were, and if they saw an actual nude image or just something vague. This was their way of figuring out if people were consciously seeing the images or not. They also asked about people's sexual preferences. Now, here is the big reveal. When they looked at the results, they found something different from their previous study with CFS. For the trials where people said they definitely did not see anything, there was no sign of their attention being automatically drawn to the nude images. This was a surprise. It meant that under this new method of making things invisible, subconscious attention didn't seem to kick in. However, there was one interesting flicker of something unusual. Heterosexual females, when they reported not seeing anything, did show a slight tendency to shift their gaze towards images of men. This might suggest that something very early is happening, like their eyes are being captured, even before full attention gets involved or before the crowding effect really solidifies. But this wasn't a clear sign of attention being directed. This led them to do a follow-up test. Sort of a check to make sure their crowding method was actually working as intended. They confirmed that what made the images hard to see was indeed the crowding, not just that they were too far out in the periphery. This was important because they needed to be sure that the lack of attention effect wasn't because the images were so far away they couldn't possibly be processed. So, what does all of this mean? The main takeaway is that how we make an image invisible matters. The continuous flash suppression method that they used before might affect attention differently than the gaze-contingent crowding method. It seems that attraction to an image, the kind that pulls your attention, might need you to consciously perceive at least some aspect of it, even if it is just a gist or a general feeling. The researchers also point to other studies using crowding, like one by Favor and colleagues, that did find unconscious effects. They suggest that maybe crowding, instead of making things completely invisible, makes you see a sort of average or gist of what is there. You get the general idea, but not the specific details to identify it clearly. This gist might be enough to influence how we feel, but maybe not enough to automatically grab our attention in the way a clearly seen image would. And this leads to another fascinating point. Remember that slight gaze shift in heterosexual females towards male images, even when they reported not seeing them. This suggests that our eyes might start to move towards something before our conscious brain even registers it. So the relationship between where our eyes go and where our attention is isn't always a perfect match. It can be a bit like your hand reaching for a mug before you fully decide you want a drink. What is really cool about this study is how it pushes the debate about attention and consciousness forward. It shows that our understanding of unconscious perception might depend heavily on the specific scientific tools we use. The fact that attention didn't engage in the crowding experiment, while there was a hint of eye movement, suggests that what we experience as consciousness might be a slightly later stage of processing. It is like your brain registers something is there and your eyes might be drawn to it, but it is only when certain features are clearly processed and bound together that your conscious attention really locks on. This study doesn't necessarily say that unconscious attention never happens. Instead, it highlights that the way we achieve unconsciousness in an experiment is crucial. The old method using CFS might have allowed for some residual processing pathways that were enough to guide attention, while this new GCC method might be more thorough in masking, preventing that. It is like trying to hide a message. One way might smudge the ink, making it hard to read details, but you can still guess the words. Another way might completely erase the ink, leaving nothing to guess from. The researchers are also encouraging more studies to figure out the exact timing of these processes. They think there might be a sweet spot, a window of time where information is processed just enough to grab our eyes, but not enough to become fully conscious or capture our sustained attention. Exploring this temporal aspect is key to understanding the complex dance between attention and consciousness. It suggests that while our brains are incredibly good at processing information below our awareness, the way that information is processed is really important. It might be that for our attention to be truly captured, we need more than just a vague awareness. We need to process some key features, and our eyes might sometimes move towards things before our conscious mind fully catches up. A fascinating glimpse into the subtle workings of our minds. And on a final note, they did a really interesting analysis about the reliability of these kinds of tasks. They found that the way they measured attention differences between people wasn't very reliable. This is a common problem in psychology research. Imagine trying to measure how much each person likes apples by having them eat one apple and then guess how much they'll like the next one. It's hard to get a truly consistent measure of individual taste. This suggests that while we can see group trends, measuring reliable individual differences can be really tricky with these methods. This research really makes you think about how much is going on in our minds that we're not even aware of, and how complex the relationship between seeing and paying attention truly is. What do you think about these findings? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into the mind, be sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science breakdowns and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching.